In 2002, Thomas Brandon, who was about to take office as head of the Archives of the United States, commented, "A guy named Alshapov saved the world." Alsapov, a former Soviet Navy lieutenant general and a Soviet veteran of World War II. At the time, most of the crew on board the B-59 submarine were unaware that nuclear weapons were being loaded, and only senior officers, including Alsapov, knew about it, so not to mention the Americans. As the B-59 submarine approached Cuban waters, the U.S. Navy spotted the Soviet submarine and reconnaissance helicopters were circling in the air, tracking the Soviet submarine, so the B-59 submarine was forced to dive in order to avoid a head-on confrontation with the U.S. Navy. The B-59 submarine was forced to dive for a week to escape the U.S. Navy's pursuit. The temperature inside the submarine was said to be as high as 50 degrees Celsius, and the crew was only given 1 glass of water per day. The U.S. Navy was waiting on the surface for the Soviet submarine to run out of power and was forced to come up to recharge. Submarines need oxygen to recharge. According to the recollections of the American crew who experienced this time, said that the Soviets may have encountered breathing difficulties at that time. The cabin was hot like hell, must be unbearable, coupled with a long period of psychological pressure, which must have enabled the Soviets to collapse without fighting. What the U.S. military did not know was that the seemingly insignificant Soviet submarine was equipped with enough nuclear-armed torpedoes to destroy an entire fleet. According to declassified U.S. military information from 2002, the U.S. military later changed its crouching strategy and began releasing warning depth charges, signaling depth charges, underwater, which were comparable in power to hand grenades and posed no real threat to the submarine. However, this action led the Soviet submarine to believe that it was under attack. At this point, B-59 submarine commander-in-chief Valentin Savitsky was convinced that the U.S. Navy was starting to move and war had broken out, so he decided to launch nuclear torpedoes to protect Soviet pride. See this in a cold sweat. If this order was carried out and the Soviet Union used nuclear weapons against the United States, then the consequences would be truly unthinkable. But the order to use nuclear weapons required the agreement of all three, General Commander Savitsky, Political Commissar Maslenikov, and Deputy Commander Alsapov, to be effective. Both the Commander-in-Chief and the Political Commissar agreed to the use of nuclear weapons, which meant that Alshapov alone had the final veto on the launch. Fortunately, despite the opposition of his own men, Alshapov was convinced that the Americans were not actually launching the attack. After this clash, the Soviet submarine surfaced and met the U.S. Navy in a narrow encounter, but the Americans did not embarrass them or inspect them, so the U.S. Navy did not know at the time that these submarines had nuclear weapons on board that would be sufficient to destroy them. So the Soviet submarines reversed course and returned to the Soviet Union without incident. It is rather interesting to note that although Alshapov was only the deputy commander of B-59 at the time, he was at the same time the commander of the entire submarine formation, including B-4, B-36, B-130 submarines, so he was actually at the same level as Savitsky, the commander-in-chief, captain, of B-59, and thus he had the right to veto this order. In a world with enough nuclear weapons to destroy mankind dozens of times, we were fortunate that in a time of crisis like that, there was a man who withstood the pressure and calmly made the right choice to save the world. Alshapov continued to serve in the Soviet Navy, attaining the rank of lieutenant general in 1981, before retiring in the mid-1980s, and died in 1998 from the after-effects of a radiation accident. In 1961, while serving on the K-19 nuclear submarine, the reactor cooler failed, causing severe radiation exposure to the entire crew, which quickly killed the maintenance crew and killed more than 15 crew members in just 2 years.